All right, so today we're dealing with hooks in React because hooks is very important when you're dealing with React. Don't forget, I mentioned it that we have two ways of creating components. We have functional components and we have class components. And class component is what we have started with, and there are some features that we have in class components that you cannot use directly in your functional component. So in order for you to be able to hook into all these functionality that the class is using that you cannot do it in function, that's where the hooks comes in. So hooks allow you to hook into React features such as the states that we have been using right from day one when we started with handling events in React. But apart from states, we have something referred to as lifecycle method. So what is the lifecycle method? I'm going to be showing you when we are talking about this use effects, because these hooks allows us to hook into the React lifecycle method there. So because there's sometimes you want to do something when your component first load, and it's only when it's loaded for the first time that's the time you want to run your code. Later on the component is going to be rendered. So there's something you don't want to do as your component is being called again and again. You only want to do it the first time that React is calling it. And after that time, then when it's being called again, you don't want your code to run. Or sometimes when your component is on mounting, what is on mounting? That means that your component is being destroyed. So before your component destroyed, or before the React remove it from the UI, when you are moving from one page to another one, what you're actually doing is changing different component. So when you move from that home page now, it will remove that home page component, then replace it with this our new component there. But before it remove the stuff, you want to do some, or you want to carry out some operation there. So how do you hook into all this React system there? You need the hooks, because with the functional component, you can't do all these things that we normally do with the class component. Because if you want to create a component, you can create the component using this function component, or you can create a component using the class component. For example, now example for class component like this. So this is how you create it. Then from here you need to extend. What are you extending? You need to extend the component that is coming from React. So there's a component coming from React, which is a class that is created for us. And once this thing extend it, there is something we need to do there like that. So inside it, we need to kind of override a function that is coming from your a method, and that method is known as this. Can you see? Is known as render. But how does this know that my class have access to render? Is because we are extending components. So this component has already defined a lot of things here that you can do. And one of the things that you can use here is this render. And this is the function that React is going to call, and whatever that you are returning from it, that's what is going to show on the UI. But look at the function one, kind of as simple here. But there's some stuff that this thing is doing behind the scene, or there's some things that is giving to us that this your function component here doesn't have access to. And in order for this your function to have access to them too, React now introduce these hooks in version 16, but currently here we are using 18. So that means we have access to hooks in your React there. Because if you look at the React we are using right now, it is 18. But this thing was introduced in the version 16 there. So you don't need to do anything before you can start using your hooks there like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do with your class component. For example, we have this component. Can you see? Component did catch, component did mount, component did update, component with on mount. So this is what you want to run. Whatever you put inside this place, whatever you put inside this your function, this is what it's going to do anytime the component wants to be removed from the screen there like that. But all this functionality here now, we don't have it with our function and our component there. So this is the class component and this is the functional component. So when you're creating a component using function, we call it functional component. And when you're creating a component using class, then we have this class component. And as you can see, you have this functionality here of extending another class, and this class is coming from React. As you can see, it's being imported for us here, and this class already defines some stuff that we can do. But those things that you can do here with the class component, you cannot do it with functional component. And then you are using functional component before React 16, you can only use it without declaring state there. So this one is only useful when you just want to display piece of information on the screen and it's not dealing with changing of data. Whatever data you'll be passing into it is data that cannot change from this component. You have to do it outside of the component from a class component. But with the React 16 there, we are able to now do some state stuff, which is what we did inside this our app. You know, down here or somewhere, we are using our use state to determine what we need to display on the screen. And when that state change, you see that React is going to re-render our component and it's going to update the UI. But that state that we're using, which is this use state, is part of the built-in hooks that the React is giving to us. But that's not all. So that's not all. We have this use effect, we have this use ref, use reducer, use context, and a lot of them that the React is giving us. But mostly, the one you're going to be using are these two. The most used hooks are these two here, most especially these use states, which is something that we have been using from day one there when we started talking about states in our application there. But I'll be talking about this use effect soon because it's the one that is going to give us the life cycle that the React is doing with this class component. As you can see, I have this component with on amount. So I want my code to do something when the component is leaving the UI. So before it leaves, React is going to fire this function. And once you fire the function, then whatever you have inside it is going to carry out the operation. Apart from this, when your component is rendered, like when it's coming in for the first time, you want to do something. So we have this component did mount like that. You can see React is going to fire this one here when it's rendering this component for the first time. But how do we have access to this stuff too in our functional component? So we need this use effect, and that's what we're going to be using to have access to our functionality that we have with this class component there. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to be doing anything with it again because nobody uses class component again, except if you are working with all the projects that have been worked on that have not been updated. So like 2013, 20, all those time like 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and so like that. But around that 2020 upward, what you always do is using hooks with your functional component there. So I'm going to comment this one out because I'm not using it again. So and inside this our example here, we want to see how we can work with these some of these our built-in hooks, and later on you create your own hooks. That's what we call this custom one, and you can install any other library later on, and those library too will come with their own hooks that you can use, which is something we're using already with this our React router dom, because yesterday we were able to get the param that is coming from the URL through this use param here, and this use param here is coming from React router dom. But what is hooks itself? So that's what we are focusing on today, and now you too can create your own hooks there. So, and what is hooks? As I mentioned there, hooks allows you to, hooks your functional component into the React features like states or the live cycle method. And what are you going to be using to hooks into the React state? We have this use states, and when you want to hook into the life cycle, we have this use effect. So all these other ones too are there to kind of hooks to elements. For example, like this use ref, we used to use it to hooks into the element state, and you can now manipulate whatever you want to do on your element, just like the way you used to do from the normal JavaScript there, that you're going to be using query selector. Then when you use query selector, then you now start updating whatever you want to update on your element, because there's some stuff you want to do later on that you cannot follow the React way of doing it. So how do you now hooks into the element there? So you can use this use ref to get the reference to the element. Then you can now do all those your imperative programming that you normally do with JavaScript. Don't forget, React is a declarative this is there. So it's using declarative pattern, because you just give it, you describe what you want, and it's going to carry out the operation for you. But when you're talking about the imperative, it means this one you have to describe what it's going to do and how to do it. So, but most of the time, what you'll be doing, you follow the React pattern by following the declarative way. But there's some stuff you still want to do that you need to go outside of the React system. But you still need access, like you need to have access to the element. So how do you have access to the underlying element? Don't forget, I told you this is JSX. This is not the element that you are going to see on the screen, because here we can use class name. But by the time you get to the browser, it will be changed to class. So how do you now have access to that underlying element itself, not the JSX that you have here? You know, anything you want to do with normal React way, put it on here. React knows what to do on the page. But what if you want to have access to what is being rendered on the screen? Then you can now use this ref, which is a reference. Ref there is just reference. So you now use it to have reference to what is here, and you can do whatever you need to do. That's one way of using this use ref. And there's another way of using it, but for now, I will be going with this use state and use effect, then followed by these custom hooks. And after that, in next class, then we can now come back to all these other one that we have here. So hooks allows you to hook into the React system there, which all those functionality you can do with this class component, then you can now do it again using your functional component. And we've dealt with one of them. For example, here we have the states, and you know how to create a state. So for example, I have username and I have, or let me just use a simple stuff. So counter like this, then set counter, set counter. So, and in front of it, we're going to use our use state, which is hooks that is given to us by React there. And whatever you want this your state to hold, by default, you pass it there. For example, here, I want my state to hold 0 for the first time when I'm going there. And inside this box here, inside this box, what I want to do, I just want to output my counter. And if I save it at the top, you see that we have counter. But we want to have a button to update this counter. So I'm not going to do it here. So I'm going to create another component in its own, which I'm going to call this function. I'm going to call it this use state hooks like this. So use the state hooks so that I can separate each one of them into their own components. So I'll cut this thing out here, cut it out from here, put it here, put it here. The VS Code, what's going on? Cut it out here. Oh, spotting empty space. Cut it out here, paste it. I don't know what is going on again with VS Code though. Why is it cutting out empty line? Okay. Cut, then paste finally. So we have return. What I want to return, I just want to return this. I will explain what this thing is doing soon, like that. But it's something that you need to know about. So that's why I'm using it. If you look at the top here, I use it here too, because I want you to know what is going on there. But I'll skip this one for now. So what I want to have, so I'm going to have this H1. Inside my H1, I'm going to have the counter. And after the H1, I'm going to have the button. And what do we want to do with this button? So we have the plus, and at the same time, we have the minus, just to create a simple counter there where you can increase or you decrease the counter. So we need to use this, our state here. So there is nothing like counter here again. So what I just need to do is this inside this box. And from there, I can save it. And as you can see, we have these two. But now if I click on these two buttons, they are not going to do anything yet. So you know what to do. It's just for us to add our event handler there. And what event do we need here? So we need the click event. So anytime this one is click, what do we want to do? We want to increment the value. And again too, we have this one. And what do we want to do here? So anytime this thing is click, what do you want to do? You want to decrease the value. So we just need to create these two functions, the method here, the function inside this place. So I'm going to have this const increment like this. And anytime you call this function, what do you want to do? You just want to set the counter. What do you want to set it to it? So whatever that is there before, we are removing one from there. So this is a simple way of doing it. Again too, I'm going to work on this second one like this. So anytime this one too is called, what do you want to do? We want to set the counter. Something is wrong there. So counter them. This is where it was supposed to have minus, and this one's supposed to be plus. And if I format my code, everything should be aligned properly. Yeah. So if I save it now, and if I click on plus, you see that it's going to increase the value, and if I click on this, it's going to decrease the value. So we are able to hook into the React system here, the state, because when I was explaining the use state, I told you that anytime something changes inside your component, React needs to re-render the component. And once you re-render this component, everything that you have inside it is going to recreate them again. And when it's recreating them, some value here, they are not changing. So your eyes will not really see that it's actually recreating all these elements. So everything you are seeing here is creating them again and again anytime something change inside the component. And if you are working with this in a JavaScript way, if you just create a value, for example, let user to just be test. So you can never change this value. You can never change it. Not that you cannot change it, but what I'm saying that you can never change it is that if you update this value, by the time React sees that this thing has changed, it will render this component. And once you render it, it will see that this line you are setting as text. So which means it's just recreating everything again. But that's not what we want. Anytime this component and anytime something change inside it, we want this our component to still maintain the state of the value, not that it will recreate everything again. And that's the reason why we are using this use state to hook into the state of the React there. So this one is going to do some magic for us behind the scene that it needs to do, and whatever value we are placing inside it is going to maintain the state, not that it will recreate everything again by setting it back to 0. The first time it will be 0, because if you reload the page for the first time, it's going to maintain this your default value. But if you update it and you do any other thing on the page, it will still maintain whatever value you add there. But this one now, anytime you are decreasing the value, what did I want to do? I just want to say let user equals to increase or increment like this. And anytime you decrease, then the user is going to be what? It's going to be decrement like this. And what do you want to do? We want to display this in on the UI at the top by just using span. And inside the span, I'm going to have the user or the action, rather, instead of using user. So let me just call it action that you are carrying out. And now, by default, the action is going to be none. So let me just put none, because we've not, first time this thing will load like that, the action is not there. So we've not really carry out action. But don't forget, we are updating our this action anytime you click on increment, and we are changing it again to anytime you click on increment. But if I click on it now, can you see? The stuff is actually changing. If you console log it out here, the action has changed to increment. But by the time React sees, okay, something changed in your component here, it needs to re-render this stuff. And once you re-render it, it will now see that you are setting action to none again. And that's why you are not seeing anything being changed here, because React is going to reset this variable from what you change it to year or year anytime it will render this your component. But you don't want something like that to happen. What can you do? Then you convert it to a state. So here now we can now say this is going to be our action and set action. And what is going to be there by default? So we can use this our use state, and it's going to be none. So which means we've not carried out any action, so we can disable this one. And in order for you to be able to update your this thing, you can't be doing it like that. As you can see, it's a constant, so you can't update it in this way. So what we can do is to use this our setter function, which is going to be set action, and you pass whatever you want to change it to. The same thing here too. Remove this, so set action like this, and then close it. And if I save it now, reload the page. So if I click on the plus, as you can see, it tells us that the action is increment, because React will maintain the state of the value that we are putting inside that variable. And if I click on it, as you can see, it knows that the action will carry out. And if I are clicking on this, it still know that it is decrement, because the thing is changing, but because the value is the same thing, so your eyes will not see that it's actually changing. But if I click on this one, since the value are not the same thing, then you see that it's updating the state. But as you are clicking on this thing, it's actually updating the state, because anytime we click, we said it has to change it to increment. Because it is already increment, so your eyes will not see that it's actually changing the value. So this thing gives us these hooks that we can use to persist the state of our variable there. So if you are dealing with normal variable in JavaScript, you can do it like this and it will still work, because you are working with a file. But here you are working with component. So the way it works there is quite different from the way it is here like that. But there's another one that we can hook into there, which is this use effect. So what is use effect? This is another hooks that you can use in React to hook into the lifecycle method. And I just mentioned two of them not long ago. One of them is this component did mount, and this other one is this component we all amount. And again too, we have another one which is this component did update. Because anytime React updates anything from your component, there's a function here is going to fire, and you cannot do anything inside that function. So here too, we can do it with our normal function like this. So I'm going to create another function for that. So I'll be creating separate function for each one of them. So we have this use effects hook like this. So how does it work? So yeah, let me return nothing much on this one because we are not dealing with states. So I'm just going to return h1 because I'm not printing out anything there like that. Because I need the state, I'm going to bring it back. But yeah, I'm just going to use effects hook example like this. So if I save it, nothing will come outside because we've not rendered it. So in order for us to see it, so we need to use this our use effect hook like this. So if I save it, you see that we have it at the top here. But what I want to do here, so I need to open my console so that you can see what is going on, because you need to see it first from the console before we can start using this thing later on. And what do we want to do here? So let me increase my DevTools and let me go to the console side, so clear everything. So what did I want to do here? What I want to do here is that anytime I render this my component, I want something to happen, but you cannot do it here. You cannot do it here at all. So for example here, let me bring the state. So cons s like this, or let me just say action set action like this. I'm not doing anything, or let me just call it counter again. So let me just call it count, then set count like this. And inside this place, I'm going to have useState, which is going to have 0. So in front of this stuff, I'm going to just have the count in front of it. I just want to show you something, what is going on there. And anytime you click on this item, so on click like this, I'm not going to create a button for that. I will just, what am I going to do? So what I will just do here is just set the count. So, and what it's going to do, get whatever that is there before and add 1 to it so that you can see what I'm trying to see here. So now, anytime I click on this thing, as you can see, it's increasing. But as you are changing any state in your component, React is rendering this in again and again. I can show you by just coming here, even for the first time. So what I want to do here, I just want to console log out something here. For example, use effect hook code like this. So now if I save it, you see that it output that stuff, because you know for the first time when the thing is rendering your component, it needs to call it, and when it call it, you know it's going to see this line and it's going to perform it again too. If you click on this thing, as you can see, it detects that something has changed, and since something has changed, it needs to render this thing again. And since it render this thing again, can you see it's called, because it's going to perform everything that is here again and again and again anytime the component is rendered. So if I click on it again, you know the value has changed, so it needs to update the UI so that you can see 5. And since you need to update the UI, it needs to call the component again. And once you call this component, you are going to see that it's calling this code again and again. Now imagine this is something that needs to happen the first time the component render, not that when you are changing anything from your component. So if I update this to 6 now, as you can see, it's calling it again. If I click it again, as your state is changing, it will render your component again. And once you render your component again, it's going to carry out all the operation that you are doing here. And any operation that is not related to React there is going to do it again and again. Only your state is maintaining our state. That's why we are getting the value. But you know, if you are creating a variable here, it will reset them back to the normal value. But what do you want to do here? I only want this thing to run the first time this my component is rendered there. So anytime my component rendered for the first time, that's the only time I want to see this console log. Later on, when I'm changing anything inside my component, I don't want to see this console log again, because I only want this thing to happen the first time. And how do you do that? That's where this hook comes in here, which is this use effect. So with use effect, you can hook into the life cycle of React. And one of the life cycle of React are this. So we have mounted. So mounted means that your component is coming in for the first time. So it's kind of being coming in to the screen for the first time. So if I reload the page, all these things are going to be mounted. So which means it's kind of it's going to render your component, and that thing is happening for the first time. So after you render the component for the first time, if anything change inside the component, it needs to re-render the component. But that doesn't mean it's mounting like a. So if you now want to, when this thing needs to re-render, so it React is going to remove your component and it's going to render it again. But you know, when it's rendering the component, when it's coming in, we call it mounting there like that. And when it is going out, we call it unmounted. So, and that's the reason you see that this thing were named like this. So we have this mount and we have this unmount. So when the thing is going, when it's being removed, that's what we call the unmount there. And when it's being rendered, when it's coming in, we call it mount here like this. So when you now want to do something, when your component is coming in there, you can use useEffect to run your code. And when the thing is kind of it's trying to remove it from the UI there, you can still use effect to run some particular code. And you can still use it again to run a code that is will only happen when it's rendered for the first time. Don't forget whether you are rendering or you are re-rendering your component, whether React is rendering or rendering your component, it's still going to mount because it's still going it's going to unmount too. But you can actually talk to it that you only want this thing to do it when it's rendering for the first time, not when it is doing it again and again and again. And how do you use these hooks? You use it like the other hooks. But before you can start using all these hooks here, there is something that I skipped here, which is the rules of the hooks. Because anytime you are using any hooks, there are these 3 rules that you need to follow. The first rule is that hooks can only be called inside React functional component. So hooks can always be called inside the React functional component. This thing is not complete like that. So you can actually use it to inside other hooks. So hooks can only be called inside functional component and other hooks, not just inside functional component alone. So as you are calling inside functional component, you can actually use hooks inside another hooks too, like that. And the second rule is that hooks can only be called at the top level of a component. So which means anytime you are creating your hooks, as you can see, anytime we are creating hooks, we always create it before we start doing any rendering stuff. All your hooks are always at the top. That's why you see that useState, we used to put it. That doesn't mean you cannot put this one here. This is not what we are saying. Before you start returning JSS code, that's where you are going to have your hooks. Not that you'll be creating hooks inside your rendering here. So inside your GSS, you cannot create hooks there. You have to create it before you start returning any JSS code there like that. And the third one is that it cannot be conditioned. You can do conditional rendering. Here now, what do I mean by conditional rendering? So what I want to do here is that if these counts are like this, so if the count is greater than 5, I want to do something. I want to shoot something above like this. And if it is not, I want to do something, which is going to be this. Let me close this one. So the end is going to be below. And as you can see here, this is what we call conditional rendering here, because I want to show this above or this below based on this condition. So if I save it here and go back to the page, you see that we have what? Below. But now if I increase the number up to 5 like this, can you see? If the number is now more than 5, then it will now be above. This is what we call conditional rendering. So anytime you want to do any logic or whatever stuff, your hooks must not be part of it. Hooks must always stand alone. You can't just come here and say, okay, it's when the user log in that you want to create this hook. If the user is not logged in, you don't want to create the hooks. No, you can't do something like that. You have to create the hook. You cannot depend on any condition. So whatever hooks you want to create here, it will always be at the top. You can't put it inside any function that you define here. For example, if I create a function maybe like increment like this, so if I create a function like this, you can't create hooks inside this function. It's not allowed. Don't forget, hooks is only allowed inside your function component. You can't just call it inside this place here. And again too, it can only be called at the top level of the component, like that. So you can only call it inside this place. You can't call it inside this increment function. You can't just come here and say you want to create a state by saying const. You want to create const like this, and inside this place you want to have a name, then set name. This is wrong. This is not valid. You shouldn't be doing it like this. You cannot be called state inside. Can you see? Yeah. So can you see? React code is called inside what? Increment. That is neither a React function component nor, so it's not allowed. Anytime you are creating hooks, it must always be inside function component or inside any other hooks. So before you can use it in a function, that function must be a component, or that function is another hooks. And again too, you cannot call it in a condition. So what does that mean? Here now, I can't just come here and say I want to use if logged in. So here at the top here, I'm going to have a variable const logged in to determine whether the user has logged in or not, whether it is true or it's false. We don't care. Like that. So if user is logged in like this, that's the only time I want these hooks to be created. This one too is bad. You cannot be doing this. You can't create hooks based on a condition. Whether this thing is true or is not true, the hooks must be created at the top here, like that. And if I go there too, as you can see, it's called conditionally. It's wrong, and you shouldn't be doing that. So anytime you want to create any hooks, it should happen at the top here. Can even happen down here, but it must not be based on a condition. But all your hooks, we normally put it at the same side here, which is going to be at the top here. And as you can see, there is no complaint on the hooks again, because it's complaining about the value that I've not used. And let me disable that. Let me disable this stuff that is checking this thing, because no unused var. So let me go down there. So let me go down to where this ES links. So let me disable the, so let me disable it too. No unused, no unused var like this. Is that the name? I hope I put it correctly. So let me check. Yeah, it's having S. The name has to match, and no unused var. So let me turn it off like this, and if I save it, it shouldn't be complete. Yeah, you can see it's not complaining that I've not used this thing, because I don't want this to be showing error for now. But that thing is really good when you're working on a real project there, because you shouldn't be creating anything that you're not going to use. Why are you not creating it when you're not going to use it? So that's the reason why that rules is there, but we don't need it right now, like that. So anytime you are creating your this in there, anytime you are creating hooks, you need to follow these rules. So hooks have to be inside your component there, which is the functional component, or inside any other hooks there. Again, you can't conditionally create your hooks. You can't do that. Again, you cannot put it inside any other function that is not a functional component or hooks. That's what I use this one for that time that I was creating here. It will not work. So whatever hooks you want to use, it has to be at the top here before you start returning your JSX elements that you want to display on the screen there. And as you can see, all our state that I've been using since, it's always at the top. But apart from this use state, we have another use which is known as this useEffect, and this is the hooks that is coming from React. And these hooks here, what is expecting from us is a callback. So there's two things that this thing is expecting from us. It's expecting callback, and it's expecting the dependency here. So we have the depths here. So this is how you are going to be calling this one, but this one is not that required. It's something that you need to use there, but it's not required. So if I remove this one, it's not really required. The major thing is the callback. And what is callback? Callback is the function that you want this your effects to run for you anytime the life cycle occur. And I'm going to explain different life cycles there like that. So whatever you are going to be passing to this useEffect is a function that you want to run anytime the particular life cycle that you are hooking into is called there like that. So this is how you are going to call it. This is one method of calling it. Another method of calling it is by supplying the array of dependency here. I will explain what this one too is doing, but let's start with this first one, which I'm going to call this useEffect here. So it's expecting a function from us, and as you can see, I'm supplying this arrow function. Here, I can console log out whatever I want to console log out there. For example, this console log that I have at the top. So I'm going to move it inside. So instead of it to be outside like this, I'm going to move it inside. And if I save it, then run this in again, everything that we had before is still going to be the same thing, because this use effect here, what is there is that anytime, but there is something going on here that I'm going to explain better in the next class here, like that, but I will just quickly brush over this thing before going to other class that I have there. So here, what you are saying is that anytime we had to call this your component, this is what is going to do last, because this thing have the order now that it is going to call. So let me actually put this in here. So I'm going to do console log out here. So before effect, so that you can see what is going on. As you can see, the console log is before the effect, and this one is what it is after effect. But just because you put them like this doesn't mean this is the way it's going to call it. But you need to understand this concept there like that. So anytime you are putting any code inside useEffect, it means what this thing is saying is that when this your component is called, after the React has already performed whatever that is here, this is what you want to do after it has already rendered the content on the screen. So which means the only time you see this console log is when everything has already been rendered on the screen. Don't forget, when you are dealing with normal JavaScript, you know it will see this line, it will go to next line, then it will perform this line, then it will go to next line. But because we put this console log inside the useEffect, and this useEffect here now, you are not the one that is going to call it. It's React that is going to call whatever you pass into it. So which means here now, the way we arrange this stuff, that's not the same way it's going to be called. Why? Because the useEffect will only be called after React has already rendered everything on the screen. So the only time it will be calling whatever that is inside the useEffect is when it has already rendered the content. So which means if I save this code now, you are not going to see the console log in this format. If I save it, what you are going to see is something else. So if I expand this thing, can you see? We have this, let me close this one and let me reload everything so that we have it. Can you see what is coming? Before effect, can you now see after effect? Can you see that after effect is something that you'll be expecting this one to be called next? You know, after the before effect, the next thing you'll be expecting is useEffect call. But that's not the way it works. useEffect will always be called after this thing has already get down here, after React has already get down here, and it has already rendered everything on the page. So once the way it works is that it will do this line, it see your useEffect, it will skip it, then it will continue with the other stuff. So when it get there, it will render everything here. And when it's done rendering everything here, that's when it will now come back into your effect. And that's why you see that this one now is being called after everything has been done. Can you see that after everything has been done, that's where this one is being called. But right now it's calling it twice. It's because of the setting that we have from here. That's why it's calling it twice. So let me disable it for now so that you can see that can this is correctly. So this is what is calling the stuff twice. So let me just disable this one for now so that we can see that it is being called. But this thing should always be there so that this thing can work very well. Like, can you see now? It's only called them once. So here I have this before React. So this is this line. It sees this line, it will skip it because it doesn't call it until it rendered everything on the page. So when it skip this line, it will go to the next line, and that's why you see that it's now calling this after effects like this. So once it's done with this line, then the next thing it's going to do is that it will come to this side, create it, then it will render everything on the page. And when it's done rendering everything on the page, that's when it will now come back to your useEffect and it will run whatever function you have inside it. And that's why you see that this one is being called last. And again too, anytime you still change anything in your component, component has to be rendered again, so it will still call everything again. But what's that the stuff that I mentioned before? I said this thing is only going to call it the first time when the component runs. That's not the way it works when you are calling it like this. So when you call this your effect like this, the only thing you are just doing here is that your code here will only run after your component has rendered. So which means whatever you are doing here, you will have access to what you have here. So from here, from your useEffect here, you know that whatever you are getting from here, you already have access to the code that you are returning from this place. So useEffect, when you are calling it like this, or when you are even calling it like this later on, This your code that you have inside it will only be called when the React has already rendered everything. So if you want to do anything on this page, like you want to affect anything on this page, there you want to run a code, but that code should always be run after the React has already rendered the content of the page. Then you need this use effect. But there's a problem with this method here. The problem is that even if, anytime you change something to your state, it will still call the stuff again and again. But that's not what I want. I don't want this thing to keep calling this my code like this. I only want it to do it the first time the component is rendering there. So how do you do that? That's where this dependency now comes in. So with the help of the dependency, you can tell here that okay, you only want this use effect to be called anytime the component rendered for the first time, and again anytime the dependency that is depending on change. So, and what did I mean by that? So let me duplicate this code, move it down here, then comment out this one. You already understand what I'm using this one for. So I'm going to comment it out because I don't need it again. So what do we want to do now? What I want to do is that use this use effect, I only want it to be called once. And it's only going to be called when your component rendered for the first time. And how do you do that? We need to pass a dependency here, empty dependency. So once you pass this empty dependency here, what you are saying is that this use effect should only be called the first time the component render. So if I save it now and if I reload it like that, then as you can see, it's only called there when the component rendered. But now if I change anything, can you see that it's not being called again? So this one is what you'll be using when you want your React to perform a particular code for you, when your component has rendered, and you only want it to do it for the first time, when the component rendered for the first time. Then anytime there is a changes to your component later on, you don't want this thing to get called again. So that's when you'll be using this one here. But at some time, you want this your code too to get called anytime anytime there is a change to your state. For example, here now, anytime there is a change to this state, I want this thing to get called again. And from here now, you can now add a dependency here like name. So what this thing means is that anytime, or let me create it again. So let me use this one. Let me move it up. Let me move this one up, and let me move this one down, and let me comment this one out for reference sake. And down here, I can now pass name. And what am I doing here? What I'm doing here is that this use effect here is going to run for the first time when your component render for the first time, and at the same time, anytime there is a changes to this state, it's going to render again. But if there is no changes to this state, you will not see anything. Can you see? It's not being called again. The only time this thing will be called again is when there is a changes to this state here, and it's something that we can do. So yeah, like that, which something I can quickly do here, that if the thing is greater than 5, I just want to update my name there. So I'm going to cut out this one. So I'm going to cut it out instead of putting it there. You know, it's a bad practice of putting your JavaScript code here. So I'm going to call this increment like this, and down here I'm going to pass the increment there, this place. And apart from this, what I'm going to do is that change name. So I'm going to create change name in this way. So what is going to do? So set name. And what are we setting the name to? We are setting it to raster like this. And down here, I'm not going to put this on click on this text again because I don't want it to be on this text like that. So I'm going to change this into div, and inside the div, I'm going to have this h1 like this. So that I can have them separately there. So enter here. Then for this one, I'm going to call it p tag so that it can be on its own line. And at the same time, I'm going to have a button, and this one is going to be change name. And on this one, I'm going to give it on click. And what do you want to do? So on click like this. So what is it going to do? It's going to change name like this. So that's what it's going to do. So pass it there. So let me save it, and if I save it, we're going to have all our value. So what do you want to do now? As you are clicking on the stuff, oh, where's my let me pass this one to the h1. So on click, come outside. Then what do you want to do? Increment. And this increment, anytime you click on the h1, so click on h1, as you can see, the value, or let me restart everything so that our value can go to the default one. So if you click on it, as you can see, this thing happened for the first time, but as you are changing the value of count, you know it's not affecting, this thing is not coming out. But now if I click on change name, can you see the effect is now called? So anytime whatever this effect is depending on change, then it's going to run this stuff again. But if whatever you are doing there is not affecting this, the the dependency is depending on, then it's not going to run again. And this thing can be used later on when you are calling API or you are doing something that is depending another value there. So you can use this effect to hook into the React lifecycle. And what lifecycle do we hook there? So this lifecycle that we have up here for the first one here, this one is hooking into every of the lifecycle, like the mount or mount and the update there. You know, anytime something change, it will call your effect again. That's when it's updating the, when you update the state, it will still call the hooks. So this one is hooking into everything, whether it's coming for the first time or you're changing anything, it will always run this one. So which means here, if I save this and I go back to the page, as you can see, it will always call that one, because whether it's running for the first time or it is running when the thing is updated there, it will always call it. But this is not what I want. I only want this thing to hook into the React lifecycle when, and the lifecycle I want is when it's rendered for the first time, like mounted here for the first time, and at the same time when my state change, but for a particular state. And what is that state? This is this one here. So if I save this one now, then reload everything, run this like this, you see it's changing the state, but this one only run for the first time that the component is coming in. But now is depending on name. So and once that name change, you see that it will call it again. So anytime the state that is depending on change, then it will call it. And if you look at it too, can you see that I'm clicking on it? It's not being called because the name that I changed is raster, and it will compare the old value with the new value. So if they are the same thing, it will not call your hook. But if they are not the same value, then it will now call the hook. Don't forget, anytime we call change name, it's changing the name to raster. So which means here now, it's just in the same text as raster. So why do I need to render when it is just the same value? Because what it's doing is that it will compare whatever you put here, the old value and the new value. So if the old value is still the same thing as the new value, then it will not call this one. But if the old value is different from the new value, then it will fire what you have here, like that, which is something we can test here. So instead of me using raster here, what I can do is just to use this math.random to just give us some random this in there. So I'm going to multiply by 4 to just give us some random number between 0 and 4. You know, the value will always change. So now if I click on change name, as you can see, it's calling it again. It's because random is actually generating a random number for us, which is something we can actually console log out if you want to see what is giving us. So that I can just say var here, and here I will just say const var is the same thing as this one, and from there I can console log out what the var is giving us. So now if I go back there, can you see it is 1.5 whatever stuff that's giving us here. If I click on it again, it is 0.33 and so forth like that. So, and you know, it will compute the old value is this. This is the new value. So you check this one. Is it the same thing as this? No. Since it's not the same thing, it will fire your hooks again. But if they are the same value, then it will not call it like that. So this is how you can hooks into your React lifecycle. And again too, this one that I skipped here, this one will only happen the first time. Doesn't care whether anything is changing or it's not changing. As long as you are putting, as long as this dependency is empty, it means it will only happen for the first time. So if I clear everything, reload, you see that it will call it. No matter what is changing here, it doesn't care. Whether the name change or is this one that change, it doesn't care. It will only run for the first render. Every other render there, it will not get called again. It only works for the first render. But what if you want to run something anytime our component is leaving there like that? And what do I mean by that? You know, anytime you click on something here, it needs to re-render the component. So that old one, it needs to remove it and replace it with a new one. So when you want to remove the old one, you want to do something. That's what we call unmount here, which is something you can use this. So component will unmount. So you to run this your code before the component will leave. So how do you do that? useEffect is actually giving up everything you want to do is on the useEffect. And once you want to do that one, what you do is that you are going to have your useEffect like this, pass whatever function you want to run there. And whatever you are returning from this your function, so whatever function you are returning from this function here, that's what React is going to call anytime the component is leaving. So this is what we call all amount here. So this is the code. So we get call any time the component, so components will be destroyed like this. So before your component get destroyed, React is going to call this. Look at it. Oh, can you see that it's one function we pass here? And again, inside that function, we are now returning another function. The function you pass into useEffect, that's what is going to call when your component is mounting it. And whatever function you are now returning from that function, that's what is going to call when the component is trying to leave. So when the component want to leave, it will fire what you have here. So which means here, this is a mounting. So I'm going to just get component. So component mount, and here, this is what we call component we or mount. That's when it want to leave. So before the component leave and come back again, then your eyes will not see that it's leaving and it's coming back, because some of the content are the same thing. But if the content are different, you see that it's actually changing like that. And if I save it, then leave like this, run it. So if I run it for the first time, can you see the only thing you see is what? Component mount. You see that it did not call anything like component with or mount. So when is the component going to unmount? Is when you change something inside it. Now when you change something, you need to remove that one and replace it with a new one. So before the component, before that old one will be removed, it will fire this your function here. So now if I change something here now, can you see component with what? Amount. So before you remove the old one, it will fire this your function here. And when the new one now come in again, as you can see, it fire the mount. Component leaving, it will fire this. Component coming in, it will fire this one. It's doing it as the state is changing. But if you don't want this thing to keep happening like this, you can now pass the empty dependency. So which means this thing will only happen for the first time. So which means here now, if I remove it, this your stuff here, this your component mount, we should only see it for the first time. And if I change something here, can you see now that is not happening? Because we said this thing will only happen for the first time, like that. So this is how this thing works, and you are going to see how to use this thing later on here like that. So this is where I'm going to stop. Yeah. So stop.